Today, we are fortunate once again to have Trent Spoolstra, Associate Regional Director of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League of the Midwest, to provide more insight into all the numbers that are floating around. Trent holds a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Notre Dame, a master's degree in international affairs from Texas A&M University, and before joining the ADL, he worked for AmeriCorps Vista, and he also was a high school history teacher in Texas. Let's give a big welcome to Trent Spoolstra.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? You're good. That's excellent. All right. Well, Don, thank you very much for that great introduction. It's fitting. And I know when we scheduled this a couple of months ago, I don't know if it was coincidence or if we did it on purpose, but today is actually, for those who are not familiar, today is Yom Ha'atzmaut. It's Israel Independence Day. And they're raising the flag at Daly Plaza later today at noon, which is an annual tradition that they do here in Chicago. Yesterday was Yom HaZikaron, which is the Israel Remembrance Day, Memorial Day for them. Those two holidays are always back to back. So I think it's fitting that for Don's introduction, talking about what's happening around the world. And I want to focus my presentation mostly on what's happening here and the spillover here in America of what's been taking place in Israel and Palestine for the last 7 months. I believe this is my third time coming to North Shore Senior Center, and it's always a pleasure coming back. I do also want to thank Jill Becker, who helps organize these presentations as well too. So it's on. Let's see. Okay, let's try this here. There we go. Okay, let's see if this works. There we go. It was just asleep. Okay. So today my presentation normally runs about 35 to 40 minutes or so, and I'm happy to take questions at the end. I know there'll be a lot of information that we cover, but just kind of a quick agenda of what I'll be discussing today. First, I want to give a very brief overview of the Anti-Defamation League. We've been around for quite a while. A lot of people know us within the Jewish community, outside the Jewish community. But I always like starting off because I think a lot of folks don't realize how much work ADL does and how many areas in society that we are involved in. So I just want to spend a few minutes giving a brief overview of our organization. Next, I want to go over, kind of set the stage for really the last several years, but over the last 6 to 7 months of this real explosion in anti-Semitic activity. I think for a lot of people inside the Jewish community or people who are friends of Jewish individuals, this recent rise in anti-Semitism feels like it came out of nowhere. Unfortunately, at ADL, part of what we do is we track various extremist groups. I'll talk about that here in a second. The latest wave of anti-Semitism that we're seeing is not a coincidence. It didn't come out of nowhere. It was a culmination of a lot of things that have been happening in our society the last several years. And so really at the core of any form of hatred is stereotyping. It's bias. And so at ADL, we actually do a report every few years going back to the 1960s. And our numbers the numbers I'll be showing you today are as of January of this year, in which we did a survey looking at, really at the end of the day, what does the average American think about Jews? What do they think about their Jewish neighbors? What do they think about their Jewish colleagues? What are things that they're thinking and feeling, right, that oftentimes are wrong, flat out wrong, or at least misguided? So we'll talk about that. Afterwards, if anybody has been watching the news over the last 2-3 weeks, you'll see there are campuses over at here in the United States that have gone through various degrees of protest. Some are very peaceful. Some have clearly crossed the line. Some of them, I would argue, range anywhere from being pro-Palestinian to ones that just flat out anti-Semitic. So we'll talk about what's been happening on campuses, as well as a new program ADL started where we are grading universities on how well they're addressing anti-Semitism on their campuses. We'll get into specifics. There are actually 7 universities in our ADL Midwest region that we covered. Probably not a surprise. A lot of universities are not doing a very good job. You can see it on the news really over the last month and even in the last couple of weeks. Finally, how you all can partner with ADL. Some very simple, tangible steps that ADL as an organization and the wider Jewish community that we need help with. Things of reaching out to elected officials, reaching out to Jewish allies, bringing this presentation to non-Jewish audiences. So part of my job is I do a lot of trainings and presentations at synagogues and Jewish federations, Jewish summer camps, and I love doing those things. But I really love coming to non-Jewish spaces like North Shore Senior Center to speak to people outside of the Jewish community. Right. And then finally, like I said, at the end, happy to take questions and answers. I'm sure there are a lot of questions that you all have about what's been going on. So first, like I said, quick overview about ADL. Anti-Defamation League, we are an international nonprofit organization. But our claim to fame here in Chicago is that we were founded actually right in this city. We were founded in October of 1913. We've been around for over 110 years. And our mission since 1913 up to today has not changed. It is to stop the defamation of the Jewish people, hence our name, and equally as important, to secure justice and fair treatment to all. Our founders at ADL, our current leaders like my CEO, Jonathan Greenblatt, believe that America's Jews will not be safe, they will not be prosperous here in America unless all marginalized groups are safe and prosperous. Understanding how hate works, rarely do individuals hate one specific group of individuals. That hate tends to spread across various groups. What's interesting is that our founder, Sigmund Livingston, in 1913, is actually from Bloomington, Illinois. So just a couple hour drive down I-55, I-57. I gave a presentation at his old synagogue, actually right after October 7th. I tend to schedule these meetings months in advance, didn't know October 7th was going to happen. And this kind of took on a new meaning of, I look at, had our founder, if he were alive today, I don't know if he'd be proud or if he'd be disappointed that ADL still exists. In the sense that we have been fighting the same fight over the last 110 years. And in some cases over the last few years, it's just as bad as it has been over the last several decades. So I don't know if he'd be, like I said, proud, disappointed, maybe a little bit of both. ADL, we are a Jewish founded organization. Anti-Semitism is the very first thing that we're going to fight. It has been our main focus, especially over the last several months, but we fight all forms of hatred. I always like showing this map to show that we really are an international organization. We have an office in Israel. We have individuals working in Europe and Latin America, and we have offices all across the United States. So I like telling people, whether you are in Midtown Manhattan, if you're on the beaches in LA, if you're on the Great Plains in Montana or Wyoming, does not matter. There's an ADL office tracking all 50 states, tracking all cases of hate that take place. We were founded here in Chicago, and specifically, I was talking to, Don and I were talking before the meeting, and he asked me if I've been doing a lot of traveling. And the answer is absolutely. And one of the reasons why is our region actually covers about 20% of the United States. So at any given time, I'm headed to Minnesota tomorrow to have various meetings. But over the last 6 months, I've been to Omaha, New York, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Chicago, downstate Illinois, Indianapolis. They keep me on the road quite a bit. But we cover, part of that is to make sure that we are covering all possible areas across the country. What does ADL fight? Of course, being Jewish founded, like I just said, anti-Semitism is number one on our list. And over the last 7 months, really over the last 5 to 6 years, that has been our main focus. There was a time, and I'll get to it here in a few minutes, where it looked like anti-Semitism was really low in America. There are people in the Jewish community, understandably so, who are asking, does ADL really need to exist anymore? I think we solved anti-Semitism. The numbers are low, the incidences are low. And part of it was when our CEO, Jonathan Greenblatt, started in 2015, ADL's main focus, we were still focused on anti-Semitism, but seeing how low the numbers were, we were actually very focused on other forms of hatred. October 7th changed that dramatically. We are almost now fully, squarely focused on anti-Semitism, given the rise in anti-Semitic attitudes, incidences that have been taking place, activities on things like college campuses. We have way more work than really what we're prepared for. That's true nonprofit fashion. We fight bigotry. We fight bias, discrimination of all forms. We fight extremism. Before October 7th, I would go to Jewish federations or synagogues, and I would say that we fight extremism on the far right and the far left. And even within the Jewish community, every once in a while, people would look at me and say, what do you mean by far left extremism? And I would explain, well, there are groups on college campuses and there are groups in the United States who also have anti-Semitism, are calling for Israel to be wiped off the map, are calling for anyone who is a Zionist, right, to be killed or murdered. A lot of people didn't believe me. Or they say, well, that's not a big deal. It's all the stuff on the right. I haven't had to explain what we mean by far left extremism over the last 7 months. We've been seeing on the TV over and over again. At ADL, we fight extremism on both sides. And we are more and more involved in fighting cyber hate, especially with social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. So odds are if hate is involved, and specifically if anti-Semitism involved, ADL is going to be that first organization there to combat it and address it. How do we do what we do? Historically, ADL has been known as a civil rights organization, which is true, we are. And I think most people have this kind of concept that ADL, we're just a bunch of lawyers and we're just taking on cases left and right, right? In reality, that's really just a fraction of what ADL does. We have a ton of programming, a ton of initiatives, a ton of movements. But to really sum up everything that we do, it's what I call our 3 8s. If there's a 4th 8, it would be litigate. We still do have a litigation team, but it's our 3 8s. We investigate, we educate, we advocate. Investigate, educate, advocate. Regarding investigation, we have what's called our Center on Extremism, or COE for short. It's made up of about 3 to 4 dozen analysts whose job it is to track extremists and hate groups. These analysts are at the top of their field. I would put them up against any think tank, any major research center in the country. And what they do is they track hate groups, extremist groups. We monitor social media posts. We monitor websites. We monitor public information. We monitor podcasts and blog posts. Because we want to know, what are these extremist groups thinking? What are they saying? And more importantly, what are they planning to do? And we get ahead of what they're planning to do. Regarding education, we do a ton of educational work. Our primary program is called No Place for Hate. No Place for Hate, which is a program that's been around for at least 20 years. It is a K through 12 program. We serve public schools, private schools, charter schools, everyone in between, and promoting to the next generation of tolerance and understanding that differences are okay. It's not something to be afraid of. It's not something to fear. We serve over 2 million students nationwide through that program. We also run a program, part of what I do, I wear a lot of different hats at ADL. We have a program called Words to Action. It's a 90-minute training program specifically for Jewish teens on how to understand anti-Semitism, how to address it, giving students talking points if it comes up in conversation. As you can imagine, I've been doing a lot of those programs over the last 6 to 7 months. Our facilitators have as well too. And then lastly, advocate. Now, I know the word lobbying, not a very popular term in modern American language, and I can understand why. But the kind of lobbying that we do is to promote anti-hate legislation. We actually have next Tuesday, I'll be based here in Chicago, we have our annual virtual federal lobby day, where through Zoom, we have meetings with members of Congress and their staff. We have, I think, 300 individuals across ADL who are going to be participating with 35 different states involved. And there's key legislation that's going through Congress right now, like countering Anti-Semitism Act, nonprofit security grant program, things that are really vital. They sound really bureaucratic, but things that are incredibly vital that can pass the Senate in the snap of fingers. And we need people to advocate. Like I said, we do way more than civil rights. We do way more than litigation, a lot of education, a lot of investigation, a lot of advocacy. Lastly, before I get into the numbers, I usually tell folks, this is probably the most important slide that I can show you today, because it's going to kind of set the foundation for the rest of my presentation. I think it's an understanding as well of what's happening in society today. Why are we seeing this rise of hatred, specifically this rise of anti-Semitism over the last several months? One thing that I explained to individuals is that hatred does not happen overnight. Rarely, if ever, you're going to find someone who goes to bed tolerant and accepting of other people, and they wake up the next morning just full on hating of individuals. Hatred doesn't work like that. Hatred is a virus. It is a process. It is a growth. It's a weed, almost, if you were to compare it to a garden. And if left unchecked within an individual or within a society, hatred can really get out of control, like a virus, like COVID, for instance, right? Part of it, to kind of illustrate this, is ADL created what's called our pyramid of hate to understand different levels of hatred. And as you move up the pyramid, it becomes more extreme. It becomes more violent. To kind of go through these levels with you, as you build off of each level is built off of the one below it. And if left unchecked and becoming normalized, like I said, hatred can really become problematic in a society. At the base of any hatred are acts of bias. Right? These are jokes. These are rumors. These are things that people are thinking and saying, right? People are thinking and feeling. Maybe this is an off-color joke at the water cooler in the office, or neighbors are talking to each other and there's some ethnic joke that is said, some stereotype is made. Is that person full-on hateful? Not necessarily. But if those things become normal in society, if they're left unchecked, then we could become susceptible to acts of prejudice. Good example of this is when individuals say, you know, I have nothing against this group of people. I just don't want them living in my neighborhood. I don't want them going to school with my kids. I don't want to go to the same church or house of worship that they're going to. They can go live on the other side of town. That's fine. I just don't want to be around them. When that becomes normalized and accepted in society, then you move up to acts of discrimination. This is where it becomes more societal. Good example of this is redlining. For those who are not familiar, at one point in this country's history, if you were a member of a certain religion, if you were a member of a certain race, it did not matter how much money you had. There were certain neighborhoods you were not moving into in this country. And that was by law. And that was by housing covenant. It wasn't somebody saying, I myself am going to segregate myself from this group. No, there were laws in place saying you weren't moving in this neighborhood. Your kids aren't going to this school. When that becomes normalized and accepted, now we have the fear of violence. When it gets to a violent state against a group of individuals, by that point, individuals in society are saying, it's not enough that I'm stereotyping or I'm thinking and feeling things about certain individuals. It's not enough that I'm prejudiced or saying I myself am going to remove myself from a group. It's not enough that we have laws in place to keep this group of people in check, so to speak. Now we need to commit violence against them. Now they're getting out of control. Now they are a threat. Now they don't know what their place is in society. Good examples of this are vandalism, or assault, individual acts of murder. When that becomes normal in society, when that becomes checked, then we reach the most extreme form, which is genocide. The idea that an entire group of people, whether they are viewed as inferior or they are viewed as such a threat, that the entire group needs to be wiped out. The perfect example of this to illustrate this would be the Holocaust that happened in Europe. Oftentimes, if the Holocaust is even taught in public schools, it's another topic for another day. I can go on and on about that one. But if it's usually taught, it's maybe in a day, and teachers go over it super quick, right? And I think a lot of students today have this kind of concept that, oh, well, Adolf Hitler came to power on a Monday and the Holocaust started the next day. It didn't happen that way. Most genocides, when you say them, don't happen that way. It's something that happens over time. There's probably something at the very bottom that people already had biases against a group of people, and maybe prejudices already exist. And then you put laws in place to separate individuals. And then maybe you allow individual acts of violence to happen. And if that is allowed to happen, then maybe a society says, you know what, maybe it's time this entire group has to go. At ADL, we've focused primarily on the bottom two blocks of the pyramid. We try to address acts of bias and acts of prejudice, so that if we can eliminate those two blocks, if we can get at the weed, at the root of hatred, we won't get to a point where we're creating laws again in our society that exclude individuals, or we're okay with individual acts of violence, or God forbid, genocide were to happen. All right, I wanted to lay the groundwork as it kind of leads into the remainder of my presentation. Next, I want to go into the crux, really, of my presentation. So first, looking at anti-Semitic attitudes in America. Put another way, this survey is really kind of looking at that bottom rung. It's looking at, really, at the end of the day, what do average Americans, what are they thinking and feeling about Jews? Yeah. So first, the methodology. The numbers I'm going to show you are actually quite shocking. Now, I've done this presentation numerous times over the last 6 and 7 months, and I see the looks on people's faces. And I know the first reaction is, Trent, ADL messed up. There's no way the numbers are that high. Your survey did not, you did something wrong when you were data collecting. And so I always like showing this as methodology to understand that we really did our due diligence. So first, the numbers I'm going to show you, where the survey was actually conducted in January of this year. It's a follow-up to a survey that we did in fall of 2022. Like I said, we usually do this survey every 3 to 4 years, but we decided there needed to be an addendum to our fall 2022 numbers because we are in a much different society today than we were before October 7th, specifically in the Jewish community, in terms of things that are happening in the Middle East, things that are happening here in America. So we wanted to get a snapshot, essentially, of, are things improving? Are things decreasing? Right? Where are we right now? The numbers I'm going to show you were collected in January of this year from an organization called Qualtrics. It is an online survey platform. We surveyed 4,000 individuals nationwide. Now, that's important because if you read the New York Times or you watch CNN and there are various polls that are conducted, most polls will maybe survey 500 people, maybe 1,000, maybe 1,500. We had a humongous sample size of 4,000 individuals representing all 50 states, all various walks of life, all races, all creeds, socioeconomic backgrounds, sexual orientations, every group that was represented in this survey. The one thing that did change from our fall 2022 survey to the one as well, the one I'm about to show you, is we got rid of the don't know, unsure option when we did this survey. Even though the survey was done online and it's anonymous, there are still people who are reading through, and I'll give you a survey, give you a sample. There are people that still read through these questions and say, I kind of agree with that statement, but I don't want to be viewed as bigoted. So I'm going to pretend like I don't know what they're talking about and click don't know, unsure. So we got rid of that option. To give you a sample of some of the questions that we asked, there are 11 key statements that we ask when we do this survey, 11 statements that we've been asking ever since 1964. And I'll show you the bar chart showing throughout the decades. But I'll give you a sample of 5 of the questions that we asked. We asked individuals in this survey, do you agree or disagree with the following? Jews don't care what happens to anybody but their own kind. So basically, Jews are secretive, that we're esoteric. They have too much control and power on Wall Street. This idea about Jews and money and greed. They have too much power in the United States today. Going to these ideas of Hollywood or the government or Jews have to take over the world, right? Those common misconceptions. Jews are more loyal to Israel than America. Idea of questioning of allegiance of Jewish Americans. And even something as trivial as saying, I think Jews have a lot of irritating faults. The next slide I'm going to show you shows you the percentages of Americans who either fully agreed or at least partly agreed with the statements. So either fully agreed or partly agreed. And here are the results. Now, like I said, we did this survey. This is a kind of a part 2 from the survey we did in fall of 2022. So about a year and a half, roughly a year and a half ago. The numbers in fall 2022 compared now, the numbers did go up a little bit, about 3 or 4 percentage points on average. The one that really went up was number 4. That in the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas, and the impacts of that war that are taking place. We're seeing the anti-Semitism today. You have the average American, almost half of Americans who think at the end of the day, I think Jews are probably, given the chance, I think Jews are going to side with Israel over America, calling into question its allegiance. The good note, I've been trying to see a lot of silver linings in the gray clouds over the last 6-7 months. None of these numbers are 51%. The vast majority of Americans aren't thinking these things. However, to put that in perspective, we're a country of 330 million people. You have a quarter of Americans or a fifth of Americans believing things about Jews and greed, and Jews have a lot of irritating faults. We're talking about, based on our survey, 80 to 85 million Americans in our country who are thinking these things, right? They may not be saying it out loud, or they may not be like me presenting it to a group of people. Maybe they're saying it to their friends, but there are a lot of Americans out there who are thinking and feeling things that are common anti-Semitic stereotypes that have been debunked, by the way, over and over and over again, yet people still believe them. What raises alarm here at ADL, when we're making claims that anti-Semitism is on the rise, it's not the boy who cried wolf. All right? We're actually not trying to get the attention. It's the fact that based on our survey data, we're seeing anti-Semitic numbers increase in the United States. What this bar graph shows, for those who can't read it, the bar on the very left is 1964, and then it progresses to the 80s, the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, to the point where of 2024, the survey data that we collected in January. What this graphic shows is people that we believe harbor anti-Semitic prejudice in the United States. The way we determine that is based off of those 11 statements that we give. I gave you a series of 5, right? If somebody were to answer yes, or they were to agree with 6 out of the 11 statements, a majority of these statements, that person we determine probably harbors anti-Semitic prejudice, right? So it's one thing, I try to give a lot of benefit of the doubt. There's one thing if somebody were agreeing to 1 or 2 of these. If somebody's agreeing to 5 or 6 of these that I just gave, person probably does not think the highest of Jews. They probably don't have the highest of opinions. And so earlier this year, when we published our survey, the headline was 1 out of 4 Americans harbor anti-Semitic prejudice, which means based on our data, 1 out of 4 of our participants, of our 4,000 people that we surveyed, agreed with 6 out of the 11 statements. The number I thought 20% a year and a half ago was high, because we haven't reached that number since 1992, 30 years ago. It's now up to 24%. And this is ringing alarm bells for organizations like ADL and the Jewish community as well, too. Now, the thing I want to point out is, I am not saying, I want to be very, very clear, I'm not saying 24% of Americans are ready to go burn down synagogues or paint swastika graffiti or physically assault Jews. Not saying that at all. But what we are saying is you have about 1 out of 4 Americans who are thinking things and feeling things about Jews that are incorrect, that are stereotypical. And then the question is, what event could happen to spark where somebody says, it's not enough I'm thinking and feeling these things, I need to now act on my bias. Or this is not going to lead to just bias anymore. Now I have hatred of this group. By the way, what we've been seeing in the last year, last 7 months is the perfect example of that, right? Specifically with Israel, I know Don introduced today's Yom HaAtzmaut, right? So in that same survey, we wanted to also ask people questions about Israel. Now that when this survey was conducted in January, we were 3 months into the Israel-Hamas war. Same group of people, same setup, online survey. We asked them, do you agree or disagree with the following statements? I do not think Jews have a right to an independent country. Basically saying, should Israel exist, right? More or less. Israel intends to cause as much suffering as possible to Palestinians. Supporters of Israel control the media. I would not consider voting for a pro-Israel politician. We are in a presidential election year. And then even something as conspiratorial as Israel operatives, groups like me, the ADL, are secretly manipulating U.S. national policy. So same thing. Next slide I'm going to show you shows you the percentages of people who full out agreed or partly agree with the statements. These numbers are a little bit higher than the general anti-Semitic numbers. We don't think that's a coincidence. Anytime that we see Israel in conflict with, say, Hamas or Hezbollah, we see an increase in anti-Semitic thoughts and feelings, and definitely an increase in anti-Semitic activity in the United States, right? Once again, the silver lining I've been trying to find a lot of in the last 6 to 7 months is individuals may be thinking things, these common misconceptions about Israel or U.S. involvement with Israel, but the vast majority of Americans at the end of the day say, yeah, Jews should have their own country. Israel should exist. What is particularly alarming is when we looked at the data, we broke it down based on generation. Now, of the 4,000 individuals that we surveyed, we did oversample individuals between 18 and 30 years old. And we did that for a reason. We want to know what the next generation of Americans are thinking. What are they being taught right now? What might have to be unlearned, hopefully at some point as they get older. Common convention, common wisdom tells us as a society that as you get older, you get set in your ways. Maybe you're not as open-minded to various different ideas, and that the younger generations are tolerant and they're accepting. It's not necessarily the case based on our survey. This bar chart shows the number of people based on generations who agree with various anti-Semitic stereotypes. The one on the very right is the baby boomer generation, who on average agree with like 3 of the 11 statements that we gave, right? Or roughly 3 common stereotypes. Gen X, generation right before mine, little over 4. It is the millennial and the Gen Z generations, so people right now roughly between the ages of 20 to 40, who believe more common anti-Jewish tropes than their parents and their grandparents do. Why that is, we can get into that during Q&A, but this is a troubling statistic of it's not older Americans who are saying and thinking these things necessarily. It's not a coincidence that we've been seeing all these things on college campuses. There's a lot of misunderstanding that our youth have about Jews, about the state of Israel, American involvement with Israel, a lot of misconceptions, a lot of fear, and with that, a lot of hatred that comes into it as well. So next, I want to look at what's happening on college campuses, specifically in the last couple months, what ADL is doing to kind of counteract what has been taking place. So first off, October 7th caught, understandably, a lot of Jewish organizations off guard. Didn't see it coming, right? And what we didn't see was literally the day after, and I didn't put it in my presentation, but literally not even the day after, the day of, there were anti-Israel organizations on college campuses celebrating October 7th. I want to say that again, right? Because this is what we were saying. Like, this wasn't, remember, October 7th happened on a Saturday here in America. It wasn't like, hey, let's gather our thoughts, then on Monday we'll join together. No, literally that day, ADL was monitoring anti-Israel groups on campus, some we believe anti-Semitic, who on social media was celebrating the terrorist attack that happened in Israel as the news was developing. Later on, it has been a heck of a school year, I will say, for college students, for K through 12 students. During winter break, our CEO, Jonathan Greenblatt, issued an open letter to all university presidents and administrators saying, you had a really rough semester. If you want to do better in the spring, let's work with ADL. Here are some things that we would give. And things were kind of quiet. Part of my job is tracking what's happening right now in America. Kind of quiet January, February, and then all of a sudden, like right during Passover, like late April, about 6 weeks ago, we started seeing incidences skyrocket again, specifically on college campuses. And what we're seeing today, what's continuing to develop. So part of ADL, what we decided to do was to take a proactive approach and say, we are going to hold these universities responsible. And we want to, especially now in the spring semester, a lot of high school seniors are graduating. They're about to head off to college. A lot of parents, a lot of grandparents are thinking about where they want to send their kids to school. We wanted to give parents and grandparents and guardians essentially a look at what's happening on college campuses. How well are they addressing anti-Semitism? So we created what was now our report card, which, by the way, everything I'm listing is on ADL's website. If you type in report card, you'll see it'll come up like first or second link on Google. So I want to give a little methodology. We graded 85 colleges and universities across the United States. How we selected them were based on, we want to look at the top 25 schools based on academics, major liberal arts schools like Williams, for instance, Wesley College, and also universities that have significant Jewish populations. We narrowed it down to, of the thousands of colleges and universities, we narrowed it down to 85. We didn't, by the way, when I show you these grades, we didn't like put all the names in a hat and say, University of Chicago, we'll give them a B, all right? Or Harvard, we'll give them a C. No, there were really set criteria that we used to grade these universities. There were 21, in fact, that we used. And they actually fall within actually 3 different categories: administrative policy, how well is the administration doing to address anti-Semitism on their campuses? Jewish life on campus. Are there Hillels and Chabads? Are there Jewish fraternities and sororities? Is there a kosher dining option for those that live on campus in a dining hall? And also looking at campus incidences. Are we seeing massive protests and encampments like we're seeing over the last few weeks? Are we seeing significant anti-Israel, anti-Semitic groups on college campuses? So to give you an idea, kind of examples, we looked at, is anti-Semitism mentioned in the student code of conduct, the student handbook at a university? We looked at, are there religious accommodation policies? So if you have a student who's Jewish and can't go to class because it's Yom Kippur, can that individual make up an assignment or a test? And then also looking at specifically anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist activity on campus, whether it's coming from groups or whether it's coming from student government. Those are a sample of the 3, but we had 21 different criteria. In our Midwest region, we included 7 of the 85. And these are very, very prominent universities, some of which maybe some of you have been to, or maybe your kids or grandkids are going to. We looked at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, downstate. We looked at Northwestern, Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, my alma mater, Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana, University of Chicago on the south side, Carleton College in Minnesota, it's a small liberal arts college in Minnesota, and then University of Wisconsin-Madison. The next slide I'm going to show you shows you the grades that we gave these universities based on the 21 different criteria that we had listed. Now, a couple of notes that I want to make here. So first, we update these grades pretty regularly. These grades were not set in stone when we issue this report card and say they could never be changed. Good example was at Northwestern. Northwestern actually had a D, as in David. After the encampment agreement, I put agreement in close, it was very, very one-sided. We ended up downgrading Northwestern's grade to an F in terms of how that all kind of played out. Happy to answer that during Q&A. Other thing I want to mention is this was a multi-month program that we put together back in January and February. So we released this report card about a month ago. Back in January and February, we issued questionnaires. We reached out to college administrators saying, give us information. All right. If we want to, we didn't want to give anyone a bad grade. We wanted to look at this information and say, give us a scope, give us an understanding of what's happening on your campus. We also reached out to our campus partners like Hillel and Chabad. These are Jewish student groups on college campuses. Same thing, give us information. So that way we're giving you the most accurate data, the most accurate grade that we can possibly give you as we give this information to Jewish parents and grandparents. The day of, we released this report card, and actually our Midwest office reached out to all 7 of these university administrators saying, here's the grade. We are more than willing to meet with you. Hold meetings, understand, did we get the grade wrong? Is there something we're not taking into consideration? Is there something you'd be willing to change, right? You switch in terms of the criteria that we went over. There were 21 of them. You changed a couple of them, you update a couple of them, we can increase your grade, right? Most universities have not taken us up on that offer. What a shocker, right? But these were the grades that we ended up giving. And like I said, this is a live report. This is something that we are willing to change grades. We didn't want to give anyone a bad grade. But at the same time, we want to give transparency to Jewish parents and grandparents and guardians to say, this is what's happening. About, if I remember correctly, I believe 40% of the 85 universities and colleges that we gave grades to got a D or an F. There are some, to be fair, that are doing a very good job, that received A's and B's. Their university administrations are tackling the issues. They don't have a lot of anti-Semitic activity or groups on college campuses that are hostile to Jewish individuals. They have strong Jewish life on campus. So it's not all. In the Midwest, it could be a lot better. Before I get into what's happening with the encampments right now, I wanted to show this slide because I think there's a lot of misconception with young individuals, older individuals, people from across the spectrums of when we talk about Zionism, when we talk about anti-Semitism, what are we talking about? What do we mean? A lot of misconceptions. And so I want to give the definition. If you were to look up Zionism in the dictionary right now, you're to go on Google and type in Zionism, you're going to get this, roughly this definition. ADL defines Zionism. The mainstream Jewish organizations define Zionism as a movement for self-determination and statehood for Jews in our ancestral land of Israel. Today, that definition can be updated as the idea that the state of Israel should continue to exist. It has a right to exist. These 6.5 million Jews that call Israel home, by the way, the other 2.5 to 3 million non-Jews who call Israel home have a right to live there. ADL, like many mainstream Jewish organizations, believe that anti-Zionism, based on this definition, is anti-Semitism. We've been very unequivocally clear about what we believe when that happens. However, I think there are a lot of misconceptions about what Zionism is. People will say, well, Trent, I disagree with the Israeli government. Does that make me anti-Zionist? No. Or Trent, I don't think the Israeli military should be doing an invasion to Rafah. Does that make me anti-Zionist? No. Or Trent, there are certain members of the Israeli government who have said really controversial things that I don't like, and I don't like those comments. I'm going to speak out against it. Does that make me anti-Zionist? No. But on college campuses today, you ask the average student, what is Zionism? They're going to say it's support for the Israeli government. It's white supremacy. It's a form of hatred. It's fascism, right? There's a lot of misconceptions about what this is. So I want to be very clear. Criticizing the Israeli government is not anti-Semitic. That's ADL's policy. But there are times when that criticism can get so severe that we think it becomes anti-Semitic. And some of those examples actually include, number one, denying Israel's right to exist. It's one thing to say, I don't like the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, or I don't like what the Israeli military is doing, versus saying, you know what, wipe Israel off the map. Never should have existed. It's a troublesome country. Get it out of it, right? Wipe it off the map. Using Jewish conspiracy myths to criticize Israel. Things like, well, yeah, no wonder Israel gets great attention in the media. It's the Zionists, it's the Jews who control the media, right? No wonder America is so pro-Israel. The Zionists, the Jews, control our American foreign policy. That's when it starts becoming anti-Semitic. Holding Jews collectively responsible for the actions of the Israeli government. There have been numerous examples over the last 7 months of individuals saying, you know what, I don't like Israel. I can't fly over to Israel right now to protest, but there are a group of Jews who are gathering together at synagogue on Friday evening or Saturday morning. Let's go harass them. Or you know what? The Hillel on campus that serves Jewish students is a home for Jewish life. Let's go protest right outside the Hillel. What does that Hillel have anything to do with Israeli policy or military doctrine? Nothing. But people think it is completely fair to say, I can't criticize the Jews over there, so I'm going to target the Jews here. And then lastly, dual loyalty, accusing Jews of being more loyal to Israel than America. These are things that we consider anti-Semitic. It's a pretty low bar, in my opinion. But unfortunately, which I'll be talking about here in a second, that bar is getting crossed over and over again. These are images that have been taken by ADL that we have been collecting since these encampments started roughly about a month ago. Wanted to go over some of these one by one with you. So the image on the top left came from the Dane County Farmers Market. Dane County is Madison, Wisconsin. That farmers market was not too far away from UW-Madison. And you can probably see a couple of the words there, but there was an individual chalking out on the sidewalk in the farmers market, Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Ladies and gentlemen, these are all US designated terrorist organizations. Organizations that want to see Israel wiped off the map and want to see as many Jews dead as possible. That's extreme, according to ADL. The image on the top right happened at, there are two images there, one on the left, one on the right. The image on the left is a flag of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, US designated terrorist organization. That flag was flown at a protest at California State Polytechnical University. The one on the right, you see an individual playing a guitar out on probably the quad, was taken at Princeton University. That flag is a flag of Hezbollah, also a US designated terrorist organization. Image on the bottom left was taken at Columbia 2-3 weeks ago. This was right after Iran was shooting missiles into Israel, like the night or the day after. There is an individual holding a sign that says Al-Qasem's next target, pointing at the people who are flying Israel flags. Al-Qasem, by the way, is the military branch of Hamas. Definitely a terrorist organization. Also taken at Columbia University, you'll see an individual with the sign, the white, that says Ahmad Saadat. This is, I believe, the head of communications for the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, U.S. terrorist organization. And then the last image was taken at DePaul University by our regional director, David Goldenberg, and the sign reads, "Jewish safety cannot be achieved until Palestine is freed." Jewish safety and Palestinian liberation are not, those are two different ideas. Those two things don't need to be connected. And also, I'd love to ask the student, what do you mean by that? Right? To be clear, there are a lot of protesters on college campuses right now who are understandably in support of Palestinians. They don't like seeing war. They want to see a ceasefire. I understand that. However, we're talking about extremism, right? We're talking about that pyramid of hatred, right, going up. There are individuals in these protests that are extreme. There are individuals, you can go to some of these encampments and you'll see these flags flying. You'll see people chalking support of Hamas and Hezbollah. You'll see people saying, Al-Qasim's next target, these Jews flying these flags over here, right? These are the extremist elements that are happening across college campuses. Little background in terms of what's been happening over the last month or so. So this roughly started late April. And what ended up happening was we saw the first encampment all the way actually March 26th. It happened at Vanderbilt University and really started picking up steam mid to late April, also right around Passover. The organizations that are involved that we know that are supplying support and talking points and media content for these groups are groups like American Muslims for Palestine, U.S. Palestinian Community Network, Jewish Voices for Peace. By the way, Jewish Voices for Peace as a mainstream Jewish organization, JVP is not a mainstream Jewish organization. It makes up a fraction of the Jewish population. But oftentimes they go in and saying, hey, no, we're Jews. No, we speak for the Jewish community. Yeah, we want to see all this end as well too. Right. By April 22nd, there were 13 encampments across the United States at 13 different universities. 4 days later, that number increased to 53. To now, as we sit here, May 14th, May 15th, some encampments have been closed. Some are popping up. Some have continued. At one point, there were over 100 universities that had encampments, that had protests happening. Big colleges, humongous universities, small colleges, right? All in between. Some of the documented, I showed you the photos. I want to show you some of the things that students, specifically Jewish students, have been hearing on college campuses as they're walking to class or as they're graduating or as they're getting ready for a commencement ceremony. At Columbia, somebody shouted out, remember the 7th of October? That will happen not one more time, not 5 more times, but 10,000 more times. That's what Hamas said after October 7th happened. There was a student who yelled that out. University of Minnesota, there's a protester displayed PFLP flag. Well, it's not just happening at Princeton or colleges in the East, it's happening here. At Yale, there were images displayed of Ali Daka as well as Layla Khalid. These are convicted terrorists that committed crimes against Israel, terrorist acts against Israel, and they're being celebrated on college campuses. University of Michigan, a sign hung up saying, long live the Intifada. At NYU, there are signs of an inverted red triangle. What's particularly troubling about that is the inverted red triangle has been adopted by Hamas. It's kind of like a common phrase basically saying like, we support Palestinian violence against Israel. So when you don't have to say it, but if you put up the inverted red triangle, that's what we mean. We're starting to see those on posters across college campuses. And at Ohio State, where there's a chant that said, hey, hey, ho, ho, the Zionists have got to go. This is a sample of things that have been happening all across the United States with these college campuses. Once again, not speaking for every single protester who are at these protests, but there are extremists. And there are people and there are college students who oftentimes don't know what they're protesting. They don't really know what it's all about. And they're hearing these things over and over and over again. That's the normalization of hate, folks. And they don't know any better. And they say, well, I think that's fine. I guess Zionism is a bad thing. I guess like kind of the student protester at Columbia University who said in a video, all Zionists deserve to die. That's becoming normalized in our society. This is a form of hatred. In terms of what ADL has been doing, I'll go through these real quick because I want to leave time for Q&A. ADL has been in the news. That's actually my boss's 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 boss, Jonathan Greenblatt. He's our CEO. He has been on the news constantly over the last 6-7 months, understanding and trying to tell Americans, the vast majority of American people, what's happening It's not a coincidence that October 7th has happened and we're seeing a dramatic rise in anti-Semitism, and understanding what people can do to combat it and be allies of the Jewish community. We have our campus legal anti-Semitism call line. There are a lot of universities, a lot of Jewish students who have had arguably the worst school year in their history since they've been going to school. And they go to their administrators, they go to their counselors and say, you know, I've been a victim of this, of an anti-Semitic incident. And the university is not doing anything. Oftentimes, because the university thinks this will just go away. I don't have to deal with this, right? The kids are almost off campus, just don't deal with it. Kids can actually either text, or they can go on our website, or their parents or guardians can come in and saying, hey, I had an anti-Semitic incident happen on campus. The university is not addressing it. I might need to take legal action. And actually, ADL has several lawsuits pending right now as a result. We started earlier this month our campus anti-Semitism crisis alert, where you can see in real time, you don't have to rely necessarily on NBC or CNN. You can log in every morning and see what is happening in real time on college campuses across the United States. Lastly, how you can help. I know my presentation was a lot of doom and gloom. There's a lot of negative stuff. However, this is very much a solvable problem. This recent rise in anti-Semitism and hatred in general doesn't have to be this way. We can fight back. And in ways that ADL needs your help. Number one, staying in touch. I know I gave you a snapshot of it and what's been happening on college campuses. Don't take my word for it, right? Sign up for our daily alert. You'll see what's happening across campuses on a daily basis. Number two, reporting hate incidences, anti-Semitic incidences, not just on college campuses, but in general. If you see something, to say something. Number three, writing a letter to your alma mater, or if you have children, grandchildren, loved ones who are going to universities, go on ADL's website, look at the campus report card to see, have we graded that university? And if they have a D or an F, write to your alma mater and saying, what are you doing to decrease anti-Semitism on your campus? Or if it's not on that list, writing to your alma mater and saying, you know, ADL is probably going to grade you guys next year. What do you plan on doing to address anti-Semitism on your campus? Reaching out to your alma maters, reaching out to universities that you're connected with. Posting on social media, right? Or talking with individuals and saying, this is a major problem. And I hope it goes away. Doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon. And the Jewish community needs your help. Lastly, introduction to non-Jewish audiences for presentations. Like I said several minutes ago, I love giving presentations at synagogues, Jewish federations, and Jewish summer camps. But I'm largely preaching to the choir. I love coming to North Shore Senior Center and other events like this because I can speak to non-Jewish audiences. I know we're all, with social media, with, our lives today, we're all kind of stuck in our own little bubbles and our own little silos. I love going to non-Jewish audiences to explain, this is what your Jewish neighbor is dealing with right now. This is what your Jewish colleague is dealing with right now. Reach out to them, right, and educate them. If there are other organizations that you all are connected with that you think I should speak to, let me know. I have business cards. I'd love to speak with them. And so with that, I'll go ahead and stop share. Thank you.